A lot of these last names that so-called black people have, they've been trained to believe that they got them through slavery. Why is that? Because they want so-called blacks to believe that they all came here from the west coast of Africa, and that is not accurate. A large portion of our people were already here in the Americas as these so-called quote-unquote aboriginals.
Who is Ankh's crack pipe? Who is Ankh's crack pipe? Who is Ankh's crack pipe?
Me, I'm a powerful activist out there.
You wanna give me some background?
Yes, well, so my family from Detroit, Alabama. Half of us went to Detroit, half of us stayed in Alabama. So my part is in Detroit. So
I always gotta educate. Y'all give me a second. The reason Alabama and Detroit, all right, most black folks during the Great Migration, folks living in Alabama, there was a train route to take them up to Michigan area, Detroit. If you lived on the East Coast and the South, you take that going up to the Carolinas to New York. Mississippi take you from Mississippi to Chicago. So you all out here, many of you know, if you're from Detroit, most of your folks are from Alabama. You're from Chicago, most of your folks are from Mississippi. If you're from New York, most of your folks are from North Carolina and South Carolina.
Absolutely. My father's side, he came up here from Virginia, and his mother was from North Carolina. So that's definitely true what Judge Greg Mathis is saying. Let me also say this. When you look at these two brothers' last names, the one in the plaid, his last name is Washington. I did a video on this. A lot of these last names that so-called black people have, they've been trained to believe that they got them through slavery. Why is that? Because they want so-called blacks to believe that they all came here from the west coast of Africa, and that is not accurate. A large portion of our people were already here in the Americas as these so-called quote-unquote aboriginals. They shared the land with the Mongoloid tribes and a lot of other races that were already here when the Europeans, both black and white, started to come here. And that brings me to my next point. A lot of so-called blacks came here from the British Isles, as well as from Germany, Spain, Portugal, etc. When you look up the last name Washington, over 90% of the people with the last name Washington are so-called black. Okay? I did a video called Welsh Names Equal Black Names. Many of the quote-unquote Welsh names you'll see oftentimes are held by so-called blacks here in the Americas. Why is that? Because the Welsh, the original Welsh, are Celtic, and the Celts were so-called black. Many so-called black people here in the Americas who have the last name, or I should say the United States, have the last name of Williams, Jones, Powell, Griffin. These are so-called Welsh last names. All right. You had a pirate by the name of Black Bart Roberts, who was a Welshman, probably the greatest pirate of the pirate age. He was a so-called black man. And if you look him up, it will even tell you that he was so-called black and he was from Wales. There are websites that are set up of Caucasian Welsh who wonder why it is that so many so-called black people have Welsh last names. Like I said, I already did a video on this. It's called Welsh Names Equal Black Names. And I covered the issue with this brother right here whose last name is Washington. They lie and state that so many black people changed their last name to Washington to honor George Washington. Why would they do that for? It doesn't even make sense. But as I tell you, brothers, incessantly, history is basically narrative. Conventional history is narrative. It's storytelling. They have to make up lies to cover real history because they don't want you to know, as a so-called black man, that you were something other than what they depict you as, that being a so-called slave.
A lot of money was made.
Now, look, this brother's last name is Jackson. Jackson is another quote-unquote British or Anglo-Saxon name. Of course, it means the son of a man named Jack. And you will see that if you look up the percentage of people with that last name, over 50% of people with the last name Jackson are so-called black. Once again, brothers, and I'll probably be doing a video on this in the near future when I get the opportunity. The so-called black man was the nobility in the British Isles and Germany and in the vast portion of Europe well into the late 1600s, early 1700s. A lot of our people were deported here after the English Civil War and the Jacobite rebellions of the late 1600s going into the early 1700s. What happened is they just took all the different groups of people of color and they just called them black here in America. Why? Because we lost. We lost that war. Because you had the nobility of Europe, so-called blacks, who were fighting amongst each other. And then you had the black bourgeoisie who were jealous of the black nobility. And they hatched a plan known as Illuminism, or the Enlightenment period, so that they could take down the Catholic Church, which was dominated by so-called blacks. Even though the Pope, by the mid 1500s, 1400s, mid 1500s, were oftentimes Caucasians as well. But this is a whole nother story for another day. Point being is this: your last name, 99 times out of 100, you didn't get it from a so-called slave master. That last name was yours already. All right? I would say anywhere from 90 to 95% of the time, that name was already yours. All right? But anyway,